I stopped at that gas station because I had been awake too long and trusted routine more than judgment. I was driving overnight for a courier company. Not anything dramatic, just small lock cases that had to be delivered before morning. I had done the route enough times that my body followed it without thought. Same highways, same exits, same rest points. When the fuel gauge dipped lower than expected, I pulled off at the next exit without checking the name of the place. The station sat just past the ramp, far enough from the road that the noise faded quickly. The lot was wide and clean, painted lines still visible, no trash drifting along the edges. The building looked new compared to most places along that stretch. Fresh siding, bright lights, windows clear enough to see the shelves inside. Everything about it said safe and maintained. That should have been reassuring. Instead, it felt wrong in a quiet way I couldn't name yet. There were no other cars at the pumps, no trucks parked along the side. The road behind me was empty too, headlights stretching far before bending away into dark land. The air smelled cold and metallic, the kind that settles before dawn. I stepped out and noticed how even the sound of my shoes against the pavement felt sharp. The pump activated immediately when I slid my card. No delay, no error. The numbers climbed smoothly. I stood there watching them more closely than usual, my reflection warped in the scratched plastic screen. I remember thinking the place felt too still. Not peaceful, just inactive, like a room after people leave, but before it cools down. I glanced toward the building and saw the interior lights bright and steady. Shelves looked full. The coffee machines glowed near the counter. Still, no one stood inside. No shape moving behind the register. No shadow passing by the back wall. I told myself it was early and understaffed. That explanation fit easily enough. When the tank filled, I replaced the nozzle and went inside to use the restroom and grab something to stay awake. The door opened smoothly without a sound. The inside smelled like cleaner and warm plastic. The floor was spotless. The shelves were stocked with neat rows of identical items, arranged in a way that felt intentional rather than casual. The counter stood empty. No sign explaining where the clerk was. No bell. No receipt paper spilling over. Just a register that looked powered on and waiting. Behind it, the wall held a small monitor showing camera feeds. I counted 4 angles. Pumps, parking lot, interior, side of the building, all of them empty. Even the angle pointed directly at the door showed no one behind me, though I was standing there watching it. I moved deeper inside, my footsteps sounding louder than they should have. The restroom door was unlocked. Clean, no graffiti, no standing water. I washed my hands and checked my face in the mirror, noticing the dark circles under my eyes. Nothing seemed off with me. That mattered later. When I returned to the front, something had changed. A receipt sat on the counter. It hadn't been there before. It was placed neatly, folded once, positioned as if someone had slid it forward and stepped away. I stood still and looked around again. The monitor still showed empty frames. No movement, no person approaching from any direction. I picked up the receipt and checked the time. It matched the minute I had finished pumping gas. The amount matched the pump total exactly. That part made sense. What in was the additional line below it? A charge for a prepaid phone card, one I had not selected, one I had not even looked at. I checked my wallet immediately. My card was still there. Nothing missing. I pulled out my phone and opened my banking app. The charge was pending already. Both amounts grouped together, authorized at the same moment. I felt a slow tightening in my chest, not panic but awareness. I set the receipt back down and scanned the store carefully, forcing myself to notice every detail. The angle of the shelves, the height of the counter, the doorway to the back room, closed but not locked. The camera monitor still showing nothing but empty space. I didn't hear footsteps. I didn't hear a door open or close. I didn't hear breathing. The building felt sealed around me. I walked to the back door and tried the handle. Locked. Solid. I leaned closer and listened. Nothing on the other side. No hum of machinery. No voice. Just the low electrical buzz of the lights overhead. When I turned back toward the counter, I noticed something else that hadn't been there before. A small adhesive tag stuck to the corner of the register. White, rectangular, with a printed number and a barcode. The same type used in warehouses for tracking inventory. The The kind meant to be scanned, logged, and moved. I knew those tags well. I handled them every night. My case was still locked in the back of my vehicle. I checked the code in my head without meaning to. It hadn't changed. I had not opened it. I had not unloaded anything. The tag on the register matched the format exactly. I didn't stay any longer. I left the receipt on the counter and walked out. My senses narrowed to the sound of my own steps. Outside, the air felt heavier. I unlocked my vehicle and checked the cargo area before getting in. The case was there, exactly where it should be. The seal intact. No scratches. No signs of tampering. Still, something felt incomplete. I sat in the driver's seat and checked the mirrors. The lot was still empty. The building lights glowed steadily. No movement at the pumps. I pulled forward slowly, then stopped and stepped back out. That was when I saw the mark on my rear bumper. A faint smear like something had been pressed against it and dragged slightly. Next to it, another white tag, identical to the one inside. Stuck low, easy to miss unless you knew to look. I peeled it off and turned it over. The barcode matched the one inside the store. That detail made everything else fall into place. The station wasn't unattended. It was automated. No clerk, no visible staff. The charges processed automatically. The receipt printed automatically. The cameras recorded but did not monitor in real time. The tags were not mistakes. They were markers. I realized then why the lot was clean, why the shelves were perfect, why there were no other cars. This wasn't a convenience stop. It was a checkpoint, a quiet one, a place designed to log, tag, and pass vehicles through without interaction. The prepaid phone card charge wasn't random. It was a flag, a way to bundle transactions, to link payment methods, routes, times. The tag on my bumper wasn't meant for me. It was meant for whoever checked later. I removed it and placed it inside a trash bag from my trunk, sealing it tightly. I drove away without accelerating too fast, keeping my movements calm. I didn't look back until the building lights vanished behind the curve of the road. I reported the incident when my shift ended, not as a complaint, just as an anomaly. The location didn't match any approved stops. The company had no contract with that station, no record of it in the system. When I searched for it later, it existed only as a pin with no name. No reviews, no business listing. Satellite images showed a blank lot, the building absent as if it had never been constructed. The charges were refunded automatically within 48 hours. No explanation attached. I changed my route after that. I stopped using exits I didn't recognize. I avoided stations that looked too new, too clean, too empty at the wrong hours. Nothing like that happened again. But sometimes when I'm driving late and pass a place that looks perfect and quiet and open when it shouldn't be, I think about how easy it was to stop, how normal it felt, how close I came to being logged as something other than a driver passing through. Some places don't trap you. They catalog you. And the only reason I know that now is because I noticed the tag before someone else came to collect it. I was driving late one summer night, heading back home after a week of visiting friends in the mountains. The roads had grown quieter the further I went from the town, and the highway narrowed, weaving through patches of forest that pressed close on either side. The sun had set hours ago, leaving the sky deep, featureless blue, and the only lights were the occasional reflector or distant car. I kept the headlights on high, but even they did little to pierce the shadows at the edges of the road. After driving for more than 2 hours without a stop, I noticed my fuel gauge dipping toward empty. I had no intention of running out of gas in the middle of nowhere, so I started scanning for the next station. The gas station appeared almost suddenly, a bright square of light in a long stretch of darkness. It was not large, just a single building with several pumps in front, but the lights were glaring, white and steady, cutting sharply through the night. The lot was mostly empty, save for one older pickup parked by a far pump, the driver nowhere in sight. The building itself had an outdated design, flat roof, and faded signs taped to the windows. A faint smell of oil and warm asphalt drifted across the lot. Despite its odd cleanliness under the lights, the isolation of the place made me uneasy. I parked at the closest pump, noting the uneven concrete under my tires and the cracks that ran across the lot. I stepped out of the car and was immediately aware of the quiet. Not complete silence, but a careful, subdued quiet, broken only by the hum of the overhead lights and the faint rustle of the wind through the trees at the edge of the lot. I pulled the fuel handle and started pumping, the clicking sound sharp and rhythmic in the stillness. I glanced around while waiting. The only movement was the flicker of the lights and the shadowed trees beyond the lot. I tried to distract myself by observing the building. Inside the glass doors, the store looked ordinary at first. Shelves lined with snacks, refrigerated drinks humming quietly, a polished but worn counter. Then I noticed the photographs taped along the wall behind the counter. They were Polaroids, all of the same pump, taken at different times of the day. Each one had a person near the pump, blurry and partially cut off in the frame, never centered, always slightly out of focus. It looked like no one had meant to be captured, and yet the images lined the wall in a way that suggested someone was keeping track. I focused on the photos longer than I had intended. There was no discernible pattern to the people in them, just the same pump repeatedly and the same figure caught incidentally. It unsettled me, not because it was supernatural or threatening, but because it was deliberate in a way that made my skin tighten. Someone had gone to the effort to document the pump and the people at it. That much I could understand, but it still felt invasive, like a record of moments that belonged to strangers rather than the photographer. I finished filling the tank, the numbers on the display rising slowly. The handle clicked off automatically when the tank reached the set limit, and I returned it to its holder. I watched the pump for a moment, noticing a slight tilt in its base. The concrete around it was stained, older dark patches alongside new, sharper marks where gasoline had spilled before. I realized then that the pump itself had a history of minor issues, likely ignored because the station had few customers. I stepped back toward my car and began to notice how quiet the lot had become. The faint hum of the lights above seemed louder, more insistent. I glanced at the lone pickup, still parked far across the lot, and tried to make sense of the shadowed space around the trees. Then I noticed a slight movement near the edge of the lot, by one of the lights that flickered above the perimeter. A figure stood there, tall, thin, and still. It was a person, though difficult to discern in the dim light. The way they were positioned made me think they had been there for a while, watching the pumps, watching the cars that came and went. I felt the familiar rise of tension, the kind that comes not from immediate danger, but from instinct, a warning that someone was too close, that the space had become smaller without moving anything. I kept my movements deliberate and slow, not looking directly at the figure while walking to the driver's side. The closer I got, the more details emerged. The person's posture was straight, rigid, almost unnaturally so. Their clothing blended with the shadows, dark tones that made them hard to separate from the night beyond the lot. I got into the car and locked the doors immediately. My hands remained on the wheel, gripping it without realizing how tight. I took a breath, trying to steady the sudden awareness that I was not alone, that someone had been observing the station and the pumps with a level of attention that did not feel casual. I started the engine, the vibrations in the seat grounding me slightly. I rolled forward slowly, keeping my eyes on the mirrors. When I looked back at the lot, the figure was gone. No trace. The space where they had stood was empty. Even the patch of light that had touched them seemed to hang, as it had before, unchanged. My gaze swept the perimeter again, to the trees and the far edges, but there was no movement. The lot was empty except for the parked pickup and the building. The sense of observation remained, though dulled by distance. As I drove away, I reflected on what had happened. It was unsettling, yes, but entirely grounded in reality. There were people who lingered in places like this, waiting for someone to notice or pass by. There were employees and local residents who used the periphery of business lots for idle purposes. There were minor mechanical issues with pumps that drew attention from staff, maintenance, and even passers-by. Nothing supernatural, nothing unexplainable, just a convergence of circumstance. Late night, isolated station, a person standing where they might go unnoticed, a driver alone on a quiet road. I made it home without further incident. The lot, the photos, the figure, Everything made sense in retrospect as a series of ordinary events strung together in an unusual order. People documenting minor incidents, someone standing in shadows, an isolated road creating heightened awareness. It left me uneasy for a time, but the clarity of explanation grounded the experience. I still pass gas stations carefully at night, noticing the lights, the parked cars, the spaces where people linger. I keep my doors locked, my movements deliberate. But the incident taught me to observe and reason, to recognize that fear often comes from perception rather than reality. Nothing at that station was beyond understanding. It was merely the combination of details, timing, and human presence that made it feel remarkable. In the end, the unease was temporary, replaced by understanding, and I have returned to similar stations without incident, carrying only the memory of that night and the awareness it brought. I stopped because my car's low fuel light had been on for at least 30 miles, glowing orange on the dashboard like a quiet threat. At first I ignored it, telling myself the car still had some range left, that the highway would eventually lead me to a bigger town with lights and people. But the road stayed empty. Long, straight stretches of blacktop cut through open land, no houses, no exits, no cell signal bars climbing back up. Just darkness and the soft whine of tires against pavement. I started to picture the engine coughing, then dying completely, leaving me stranded out there with nothing but wind and insects and a phone that wouldn't help. I had been driving since late afternoon, crossing state lines without really thinking about them. I was supposed to be starting a warehouse job in Colorado, but it fell through a week before I left. The manager stopped answering my emails. I'd already packed my car, already given up the room I was renting, already told people I was leaving. Pride kept me moving even after the plan collapsed. I told myself I'd figure it out on the road. I always did. That logic carried me into Kansas, somewhere I didn't intend to be, somewhere flat and quiet and unfamiliar. I didn't know anyone there. I wasn't supposed to be there at all. The gas station appeared suddenly, a low shape off the highway, marked by a tall sign with half its lights burned out. The word gas still glowed, but the prices underneath were dark. I pulled in without thinking twice, my headlights sweeping over cracked concrete and weeds pushing through seams. The place looked old, like it had been built decades ago and never updated, just kept alive enough to keep existing. It had a flat roof and buzzing fluorescent lights that attracted clouds of insects. Moths slammed themselves against the glass again and again. Only one pump worked. The others were wrapped in yellow caution tape that flapped softly in the breeze. I parked close to the working pump, leaving my car running for a second longer than necessary before shutting it off. The sudden silence felt heavier than the engine noise had. The windows were covered with faded beer ads and lottery posters, their colors washed out by sun and time. Something dark brown had stained the concrete near the entrance, spreading out in an uneven shape that looked old and ground into the surface. I try not to think too hard about what it could have been. I focused on practical things. Fuel, bathroom, back on the road. When I stepped inside, the air felt stale and warm. The smell was a mix of oil, old coffee, and something sour I couldn't place. The lights hummed overhead, loud enough to notice, loud enough to feel. The shelves were half-stocked with dusty snacks and sun-faded bottles. Behind the counter, the cashier stood still, his head angled downward. He didn't look up when I walked in. I waited a second, then another, expecting some acknowledgement, but nothing came. No radio played, no music, no television, just the hum of the lights and the faint buzzing of insects outside. I paid for gas without a word. The receipt printed slowly, curling at the edge. I took it and turned toward the door, feeling that strange pressure between my shoulder blades that comes when you're being watched, even if you can't prove it. I didn't look back. The bathroom wasn't inside. A faded sign pointed around the side of the building. I hesitated. I didn't really want to go back out into the dark, but I knew if I didn't use it now, I'd regret it later when the road stayed empty for another hour. The bathroom door was metal and dented, the paint peeling away in long strips. There was no lock. I pushed it open with my foot. Inside, the room was small and damp. The light flickered, buzzing louder than the ones inside the store. The mirror above the sink was cracked down the middle, the lines splitting my reflection so my face didn't quite line up with itself. One eye looked higher than the other. My mouth seemed crooked. It made me uneasy in a way I couldn't fully explain. I tried to be quick. While I was in there, I heard footsteps outside. They crunched on gravel, slow and deliberate. I froze, listening. The sound came closer, then stopped right outside the door. I waited for a shadow to pass under the gap, or for the door to move, or for the steps to continue. Nothing happened. The footsteps didn't walk away. They didn't circle. They just stopped. The silence stretched out, thick and uncomfortable. I told myself it was probably the cashier taking a smoke break, or another traveler pulling in quietly. Still, my heart started to beat faster. I finished up, washed my hands quickly, and stood there for a moment, staring at my split reflection, trying to calm myself before opening the door. When I stepped outside, there was no one there. The area around the bathroom was empty, lit only by a single buzzing bulb that cast harsh shadows. The gravel lay undisturbed except for fresh footprints leading away from the door. They didn't head back toward the store. They moved toward my car. My stomach tightened as I followed them with my eyes. The footprints went all the way around my vehicle, a slow, complete circle like someone had taken their time examining it. Then they veered off into the field behind the station, disappearing into tall grass and darkness. I stood there longer than I should have, keys clenched in my hand. Every sound felt amplified. The insects, the wind, the distant rush of cars on the highway I couldn't see. I didn't like the idea of walking back to my car, but I liked the idea of staying still even less. I moved quickly, unlocked the car, and got in. I locked the doors immediately. My hand shook as I sat there, staring out through the windshield. I told myself to just leave, to forget about the gas, to drive on fumes if I had to. But I was already there. The tank was nearly empty. If the car died 10 miles down the road, that would be worse. I stepped back out and started the pump, keeping my back to the car so I could see the field and the building at the same time. The pump was slow, clicking and whining as it filled the tank. I kept scanning the darkness, half expecting to see someone emerge from the grass, but nothing moved. When the pump finally stopped, I hung the nozzle back in place and got into the car again. I didn't sit there. I started the engine right away and pulled forward, headlights sweeping across the field one last time. For a second, I thought I saw the grass shift, like something crouched low and then settle back down. I didn't stop to confirm it. I drove until the station disappeared in my rearview mirror, then kept going. I didn't slow down. I didn't turn the radio on. My eyes stayed locked on the road ahead, my mind replaying the footprints over and over. I told myself there was a reasonable explanation. Someone checking if the car was unlocked. Someone curious. Someone harmless. But none of those explanations explained why they stopped outside the bathroom door and waited without making sound. About 15 minutes later, I checked my mirrors again and noticed a dark shape tied to my rear bumper. I pulled over onto the shoulder, heart pounding, and got out to look. A length of frayed rope had been looped loosely around the bumper, knotted just enough to stay in place. It wasn't dragging. It wasn't caught by accident. Someone had tied it there. I stood on the side of the highway, cars rushing past, wind tearing at my clothes, and felt the weight of how close I had come to something worse. If I had stayed longer, if I had gone back inside, if the car had stalled, I untied the rope, threw it as far as I could into the ditch, and got back in. I didn't stop again that night. I drove until the sky started to lighten and a real town appeared ahead, full of normal signs and open businesses and people starting their days. I pulled into a busy station, filled up again even though I didn't need to, and sat there for a long time before getting back on the road. I never reported what happened. I didn't know who to tell or what I would even say. Nothing technically happened. No one touched me. No one spoke to me. But sometimes late at night, when I'm driving through empty places, I think about that station in Kansas and the way those footprints circled my car slowly like someone deciding what to do next, and how close I came to giving them more time to decide. We stopped because my brother needed coffee to stay awake. That was the simple reason, the kind you don't question when you've been driving for hours and the road starts to blur together. We were on our way back from our aunt's funeral. Heading home, through a stretch of rural highway that felt longer on the return trip. The sky had already gone dark, and snow had started to fall earlier in the evening, light but steady, enough to dull the edges of everything. Inside the car, it smelled like cold fast food wrappers and a pine air freshener hanging from the mirror, the kind meant to cover up old smells but never really does. We hadn't talked much since leaving the cemetery. Grief sat between us, heavy and awkward. The heater was on low, blowing dry air that made my eyes sting. The road signs came up slowly and passed even slower. When the gas station sign appeared ahead, glowing pale against the dark, it felt like a relief. Not comfort exactly, just a break in the sameness. The station was open, lights on, but it felt closed the moment we pulled in. It was one of those small roadside places, flat-roofed, with old pumps and a building that looked like it hadn't been repainted in years. Snow had gathered in uneven patches around the lot, packed down where tires had driven through earlier, untouched everywhere else. Only one car sat at a pump, its engine running, headlights on, exhaust rising in a thin cloud. No one was inside it. I parked at the pump farthest from the building. As soon as I stepped out, the cold hit hard, sharper than I expected. It cut through my jacket and went straight to my chest. The snow crunched loudly under my boots, the sound carrying too far in the quiet. The only other noise was the distant hum of the highway and the low rumble of the other car's engine. That was when I noticed a man by the ice freezer. He stood a few feet away from it, just off to the side of the building, facing the road. He wasn't doing anything, not smoking, not checking his phone, just standing there, hands at his sides. He wore a thin jacket, the kind you'd wear in fall, not in this cold. No hat, no gloves. I remember thinking that first, how wrong he looked for the weather, how his clothes didn't match the night. I started pumping gas and kept my eyes on him without really meaning to. Something about the way he stood felt off. He didn't shift his weight. He didn't turn his head. The snow continued to fall around him, collecting on his shoulders and hair, but he didn't brush it away. He looked like part of the place, like something that had always been there. The station lights flickered once, briefly dimming the lot before coming back full. When they did, he was still there, in the exact same position. I watched him the entire time I pumped gas. I didn't look away. Every instinct told me to keep track of him, to notice if he moved even an inch. My breath came out in short clouds, my fingers stiff around the pump handle. I told myself there was a normal explanation. Maybe he was waiting for someone inside. Maybe he was lost in thought. Still, the longer I looked, the more uneasy I felt. The car at the other pump kept running. Its headlights stayed fixed on the snowy road ahead. No one came out of the store. No door opened. No footsteps. The man didn't react to anything. He didn't glance toward me, even though the pump clicked and clanked loudly. He didn't look at the car pulling in or out because no other cars did. When the tank was full, the pump shut off with a loud click that made me jump. I replaced the nozzle and stood there for a second, not ready to turn my back. The man still hadn't moved. I got back into the car quickly and shut the door, locking it without thinking. The warmth inside felt strange after the cold, almost too much. My brother stared straight ahead, hands on the wheel, eyes tired and unfocused. I asked him if he had seen the man standing by the ice freezer. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't point. I just asked. He told me he hadn't seen anyone. That answer hit me harder than I expected. I turned and looked back through the window immediately. The spot where the man had been standing was empty. The ice freezer door was open, hanging wide, lights spilling out onto the snow. The car that had been running at the pump was gone. What caught my attention more than anything else was the ground. The snow around the pumps and the freezer was smooth, untouched except for our own tire tracks and footprints. There were no fresh tire tracks leading out of the lot. No curved lines heading back toward the road. The snow fell lightly, but not fast enough to erase something like that in seconds. I opened my door and stepped out again despite every part of me telling me not to. The cold rushed back in, sharper than before. I walked a few steps toward where the other car had been. The snow there was packed and slightly darker, like it had been sitting for a while. There was no clear path away from it. No signs of movement. The open freezer door hummed loudly. I approached it slowly, my eyes scanning the dark space behind the building the edge of the trees beyond the lot. The inside of the freezer was full of bags of ice stacked neatly. Cold air poured out, fogging slightly in the warmer light. There were no footprints leading to or from it besides my own. I shut the freezer door, the sound echoing too loud in the quiet. That was when I noticed the driver's side door of the other car hadn't been left open. It was gone entirely, car and all, without any sign of how it left. I went back to our car, my heart beating faster now, my thoughts racing in tight circles. My brother started the engine without asking anything else. He didn't need to. We both felt it. That sense that something wasn't right, that we had stepped into a moment that didn't follow the normal rules. We pulled out of the lot slowly, headlights sweeping across the snow one last time. I watched the freezer, the pumps, the dark corners of the building, half expecting the man to appear again. Nothing moved. The station shrank behind us, its lights fading as we merged back onto the highway. We drove in silence for a long time. The road stretched ahead, empty and pale under the headlights. Snow continued to fall, steady and quiet. I kept checking the mirrors, my eyes drawn to any shape or shadow that didn't belong. Several miles down the road, the car started to smell different. Not the fast food or the air freshener. Something colder, sharper. I looked down and noticed snow scattered across the back floor mat, more than what should have come in on our shoes. It was melting slowly, soaking into the carpet. I followed it with my eyes and froze. The rear passenger door wasn't fully shut. It was latched but not sealed, just enough for cold air to slip in. My brother pulled over onto the shoulder immediately when I pointed it out. We both got out. The wind hit hard, pushing snow sideways. The door showed no damage, no signs of being forced. Inside, the back seat was empty, but the fabric was damp, like someone had been sitting there in wet clothes. We didn't stay there. We shut the door properly, got back in, and drove until we reached the next town, one with traffic lights and open stores and people moving around. We stopped at a bright, busy gas station and sat there for a long time without getting out. Later, when we talked about it again in daylight, we compared details. The thin jacket, the running car, the open freezer, the untouched snow. None of it lined up. There was no explanation that fit cleanly. We looked up reports, news articles, anything that might explain it. Nothing did. Even now, what stays with me most isn't the man himself. It's the feeling of watching something that shouldn't have been there, of seeing it clearly while someone right beside me saw nothing at all. It's the knowledge that whatever happened at that gas station didn't follow us because we were lucky or because we left quickly, but because it chose not to. Every winter since then, when I stop for gas late at night and the snow is falling, I look around the lot carefully. I watch the freezers. I watch the pumps. And I make sure every door is shut tight before I pull back onto the road. I was driving nights back then, hauling medical supplies between distribution centers and hospitals. It paid better than daytime runs and came with fewer people to deal with. The routes were usually fixed, boring in a way that let your mind go quiet. I liked that. I'd start after sunset, drive for hours under empty skies, and be done before morning traffic woke up. That stop wasn't on my route. I remember that clearly. I'd already checked the fuel range before leaving, already planned my stops. About 3 hours into the drive, my GPS rerouted me because of construction. At first, it was small changes, exit earlier, take a state road instead of the highway. Then it pushed me farther off course, on a narrower roads with no shoulder and no street lights. I trusted it because I always did. That was part of the job. The farther I went, the darker it got. No houses, no farm lights, just trees closing in on both sides, and the beam of my headlights cutting a short tunnel through the dark. The radio crackled and lost signal. Cell service dropped to nothing. I wasn't worried yet, but I started watching the fuel gauge more closely. When the gas station showed up, it felt sudden, like it had been placed there after the road was built. One moment, there was nothing, and the next there was a small pull-off with a single building and 2 pumps. No lights around it for miles. The station itself was lit, but the glow barely reached the road. Everything beyond it was swallowed by dark. I pulled in mostly out of relief. I wanted fuel, coffee, and a bathroom. The lot was cracked and uneven. Weeds pushed through the concrete. The pumps looked old but functional. No other cars were there. The silence was deep, the kind that makes you notice your own breathing when you step out of the cab. Inside, the air smelled stale like dust and old oil. The lights buzzed overhead. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with the basics: chips, bottled drinks, motor oil. But everything looked untouched, like it had been sitting there for a long time. No cashier stood behind counter. No bell rang when I walked in. No music played. What caught my eye right away was the logbook. It sat on the counter, open, with a pen resting across the pages. It wasn't a receipt book or anything official looking. It was thick, like a guest sign-in book you'd see at a bed and breakfast. The cover was worn soft, the edges rounded from use. I assumed it was for drivers to sign for fuel, after hours, or something like that. I stepped closer and looked down at it. Names filled the pages, page after page of them, dates next to each name, sometimes with a time written beside it. At first glance, it looked normal enough, but the more I looked, the stranger it felt. The handwriting was the same for every entry. Same slant, same pressure, same way the letters looped. Different names, different dates, but all written by the same hand. Some of the dates went back years. I flipped a few pages forward, then back. The entries weren't daily, but they were consistent. A few a week, sometimes several in one night. No comments, no explanations, just names and dates, all neat, all careful. It didn't look like people signing themselves in. It looked like someone recording them. I became aware of how quiet the place was. Not just no music, but no background noise at all. No refrigerator hum, no distant traffic, just the lights buzzing above me. That was when I heard the scraping sound. It came from outside, along the wall of the building. Slow and heavy, like something dragging against metal. It wasn't random. It was steady, deliberate. The sound moved from one end of the building to the other, close enough that I could picture it tracing the outer wall. I froze with my hands still resting on the logbook. The scraping continued, closer now, each sound stretching out just long enough to make my skin crawl. It reminded me of nails dragged across a surface, not fast, not aggressive, just firm enough to leave a mark. Whatever was making it was big enough to press weight into the wall. I didn't move. I didn't breathe much. I listened. The sound reached the section of wall directly behind me and stopped. No footsteps followed. No door opened. Nothing else happened. Just silence again, thick and heavy. I stood there for a few seconds longer, trying to convince myself it was something simple. A loose sign, a branch rubbing against the building, an animal. But none of those explanations fit the way the sound moved evenly along the wall or how it stopped exactly where I stood. I closed the logbook slowly and set it back where it was. I didn't look behind me. I didn't go to the bathroom. I didn't grab coffee. I walked out the door and back toward my truck, every sense locked onto my surroundings. The night felt colder outside. The darkness pressed closer. As I climbed into the cab, I noticed the side of the building where the sound had been. The metal siding there looked scraped and dull, long faint lines catching the light at the right angle. I didn't get close enough to touch them. I started the engine and pulled away without fueling up. As I drove back onto the road, I checked the mirrors, expecting to see movement, headlights, anything. There was nothing. The station vanished behind me quickly, swallowed by the dark, as if it had never been there. I drove until my hands stopped shaking. When I finally reached an area with signal, I logged the stop with dispatch, explaining that I had left without paying due to safety concerns and that I'd refuel at the next station. They noted it and told me to submit a written report later. I finished the run without incident. By morning, the night felt distant, like a bad dream you almost forget by daylight. Later that week, I filed the report. I included the location the GPS had sent me to, the time, and what I'd seen inside. A supervisor followed up, asking for clarification. They couldn't find the station on any of their maps. Neither could I. The coordinates led to an empty stretch of road. No listing, no satellite image showing a building. Nothing. I went back through my GPS history. The reroute still showed, but the stop itself didn't. It was like the device had guided me there and then erased the place afterward. I kept driving nights for a while after that, but I stopped trusting reroutes in unfamiliar areas. If a road looked too empty, too quiet, I stayed on course and risked the delay. Eventually, I switched to daytime runs. I still think about that logbook, about the names written carefully by the same hand, over years, waiting on a counter for someone to open it again. I think about the sound on the wall and how it stopped exactly behind me, as if whatever made it knew where I was standing. Nothing supernatural happened to me that night. No one chased me. Nothing followed me home. But I learned something important. Sometimes the danger isn't that something attacks you. Sometimes it's that you arrive somewhere you were never meant to find, and you leave before it decides what to do with you. I stopped because I was late for work and needed caffeine more than food or sleep. The sun was barely up, a thin gray light pushing against the horizon, not bright enough to feel like morning yet. My head felt tight and heavy, the way it does when you wake up already behind schedule. I took the same shortcut I always took, a quiet stretch of road that cut past a small commercial area before reconnecting with the main route. That gas station sat right along it. I had passed it before without stopping, never thinking twice about it. That morning, it looked completely normal. Clean windows, bright interior lights, fresh-looking pavement around the pumps. No flickering signs or broken doors. The kind of place you trust without thinking. That normality is what stayed with me later. If it had looked run down or strange, I might have paid more attention. Instead, I pulled in automatically, parked near the entrance, and went inside focused only on getting coffee and leaving. The air inside smelled like disinfectant and brewed coffee. The floor was dry and clean. Shelves were neatly stocked, labels facing forward. The coffee station looked recently wiped down, no sticky residue or spilled grounds. The clerk stood behind the counter, already moving as I approached. He picked up a cup, reached for the lid I always used, and placed it beside the register before I even touched the machine. The receipt printed almost immediately, already turned toward me. My name was printed at the top. I noticed it in that delayed way you notice something wrong a second after it happens. My eyes caught the letters and my brain stalled. I looked up at him, expecting confusion or explanation, but he looked relaxed, familiar, like this was routine. His expression carried the kind of patience people have when they see the same face every day. He nodded once, still smiling, as if acknowledging a pattern rather than a person. I stood there longer than necessary, coffee cooling in my hand. I tried to piece together how this could make sense. I knew I had never stopped there before. I was certain of that. My mornings were rushed, but consistent. I tracked my habits closely because being late had consequences. This station was not part of that routine. Yet the way he moved, the way the receipt had printed without hesitation, the way my name appeared without me offering anything, all of it suggested otherwise. I left without lingering, my sense of urgency replaced by a low pressure in my chest. In the car, I set the cup down and opened my banking app, more to ground myself than because I expected to find anything. The screen loaded slowly. I scrolled back through my transactions, eyes moving quickly at first, then slowing as a pattern emerged. Charges from that gas station filled the list. Same amount, same time, every weekday morning. Going back 3 weeks. The timestamps matched the window when I was usually on the road. The amounts were small and consistent, the cost of a coffee and nothing more. There were no missing funds beyond that. No large or unusual purchases. Just that repeated line, day after day, sitting there like it had always belonged. I checked my location history. The route showed the same shortcut every morning, including a brief stop at that exact address. The data was precise. Arrival, departure, duration measured in minutes. My car's mileage did not align. I kept records for maintenance and fuel efficiency. I knew how far I drove each week. The odometer showed fewer miles than it should have. Not by a lot. Enough to notice, not enough to immediately explain. It was as if a short stretch of driving had been erased over and over again. I lived alone at the time. No roommates. No one with access to my keys. My apartment was small and orderly. Nothing went missing. Nothing appeared out of place. My sleep schedule felt normal, if a bit strained. I went to bed tired and woke up tired, but that wasn't new. I chalked it up to stress, long hours, too much caffeine. Over the next few days, I paid closer attention to myself in the mornings. I set alarms. I placed objects in specific positions before bed. I checked my car when I woke up. Everything seemed fine. Nothing moved. Nothing changed. Still, the charges kept appearing. Still, the clerk acted the same way when I stopped, already prepared, already expecting me. The unease grew slowly. It didn't feel like panic. It felt like erosion, like something solid in my understanding of my own life was wearing away without resistance. I began to dread mornings, not because of work, but because of the uncertainty attached to that stop. I stopped taking the shortcut. I altered my route by 10 minutes, choosing a busier road with more traffic and more lights. I drove past different stores, different buildings, places I recognized more clearly. I did not stop for coffee. I went straight to work, tired and unfocused, but present. The charges stopped immediately. No delay, no overlap. The last one appeared the morning before I changed my route. Nothing after that. My mileage began to line up again. My location history showed no unexplained gaps. The pattern vanished as cleanly as it had existed. That should have been enough. It wasn't. The need to understand what had happened stayed with me. I reviewed my health records. I scheduled a physical. Blood work came back normal. Stress levels were high, but not alarming. Sleep quality was poor, but not dangerous. I mentioned memory lapses in a careful way, avoiding drama. The doctor suggested tracking my sleep more closely and reducing caffeine. The answer came by accident. A few weeks later, my building management sent out a notice about routine maintenance. They planned to inspect heating units and ventilation systems. When they entered my apartment, they tested for carbon monoxide as part of the process. The detector they carried beeped immediately. A small leak had developed in the aging heating system. Not enough to trigger alarms. Not enough to cause acute symptoms. Enough to affect cognition over time. Enough to interfere with memory formation, especially during sleep and early morning hours. The timeline fit. Repeated exposure during the night. Impaired memory encoding. Habitual behavior without recall. A routine formed and executed without conscious awareness. Driving a familiar route. Stopping at a familiar place. Completing a familiar action. Then waking up mentally somewhere later, assuming continuity where there was none. The clerk knew my name because I paid with the same card every morning. The receipt printed automatically. The behavior looked intentional because it was practiced. My mileage didn't match because parts of my day never fully registered. The charges stopped when the route changed because the trigger disappeared. I replaced the heating unit. I installed new detectors. I took time off work. My sleep improved slowly. My mornings regained shape and sequence. The sense of missing time faded. I never went back to that gas station. Not because it was dangerous, but because it had become proof of how easily a life can fracture without visible damage. How routine can continue while awareness slips. How a place can feel ordinary and still be the site of something deeply wrong. I pass it sometimes on longer drives. It still looks clean, still open, still normal. I don't feel fear when I see it. I feel caution, the kind that comes from knowing that losing time does not always feel like losing control, and that recognition can come much later, printed neatly on a receipt you do not remember earning. I quit my job on a Tuesday and left on a Friday. I did not plan anything beyond the first tank of gas. I packed clothes, a cooler, a sleeping bag, and a notebook I told myself I would use. I drove west because the road out of town curved that way and because I did not want to pass places I recognized. I wanted long stretches of nothing, places where the road did not care who I was before. By the third night, the drive had slowed me down. I had stopped checking the time and stopped caring about distance. The radio faded in and out, so I left it off. The weather turned cold without warning. The fog came in after sunset, not heavy at first, just thin bands sliding across the road. It thickened as I climbed higher, wrapping the trees and guardrails until everything beyond the headlights disappeared. The curves tightened. The drop-offs felt closer. I caught myself leaning forward in the seat, gripping the wheel harder. I saw the gas station only because of the light. A soft white glow spread across the fog, wide and flat, like it had nowhere to go. I did not need fuel yet, but I did not trust the road ahead. The idea of another hour of blind curves made my stomach tighten. I turned in without thinking much about it. The station sat alone, no other buildings nearby. The road ran past it and vanished into the fog on both sides. Trees pressed close behind the lot, dark shapes stacked together. The pavement was cracked and uneven. Weeds grew through the seams. The lights above the pumps buzzed faintly, steady but tired. The building itself was small, one story, windows dark. No cars, no movement. I parked at the closest pump and stepped out. The air felt heavier than before, damp and sharp in my lungs. It carried a faint metallic smell, like wet coins or cold iron. I told myself it was the fog, the moisture catching on old steel. I opened the fuel door and started the pump. The clicking sounded loud in the quiet, each tick clear and spaced, echoing back at me from the trees. I stood there watching the numbers rise, listening to the engine cooling under the hood. The fog shifted in slow waves around the edge of the lot. The light above me cut a clean circle, everything beyond it fading to gray. I scanned the road out of habit, then the building, then the tree line. That was when I noticed the shape. It stood just beyond the reach of the light, near where the pavement ended and the dirt began. Tall, straight, narrow. It did not move. It did not sway or breathe or shift its weight. It did not reflect the light the way a sign or pole would. It absorbed it. The outline was there, but soft at the edges, as if the fog clung tighter around it. At first, I assumed it was a post or a thin tree trunk closer than it looked. The forest was full of vertical lines. I turned my head slightly to look straight at it to settle it in my mind. My eyes slid away, not in panic, not fast, just enough that I could not lock onto it. Every time I tried to focus, my gaze drifted to the space beside it, then snapped back to the whole scene. I could see the area. I could see the fog and the trees and the dark gap where it stood. But the shape itself stayed just outside clear focus, like a smudge on a lens. I felt a light pressure in my ears, the kind that comes with altitude changes or a storm rolling in. A dull, ringing settled behind the sound of the pump. My jaw tightened without me meaning to. The metallic smell grew stronger. It coated the back of my throat. I told myself to finish and get back in the car. I shifted my weight and glanced at the pump. The numbers slowed, then stopped. The handle clicked off early. The tank was not full. I squeezed the trigger again. Nothing happened. The display stayed frozen. I released it and tried again. Still nothing. No error message. No sound. Just silence where the clicking should have been. I looked back toward the tree line without turning my head fully, using the corner of my vision. The shape was still there. It had not moved closer. It had not changed. It remained just outside the light, exactly where it had been. My skin prickled along my arms. I became aware of how exposed I was, standing in that open space with nothing between me and the trees. I capped the tank and stepped back, my movements slow and controlled, as if sudden motion might draw attention. I returned the nozzle and closed the fuel door. As I walked toward the driver's side, the ringing in my ears grew slightly louder, then steadied. The fog shifted again, thickening near the ground. The light above flickered once and held. I reached for the door handle and paused. I do not know why. Instinct, maybe. The sense that if I turned my back too fully, I would lose track of where the shape was. I stood with one hand on the handle and angled my body so I could still see the edge of the lot. That was when it moved. Not forward, not backward. It slid sideways, smooth and level like something being pulled along a track. It did not bend or break its outline. It simply shifted left, passing behind a cluster of trees and vanishing as if it had never been there. No sound followed it. No branches moved. No leaves rustled. The fog rushed in to fill the space it left, thick and immediate, erasing the gap. The tree line became a wall again. I opened the door and got in. I locked it before I sat down. The interior felt too quiet. I started the engine. The headlights cut into the fog, revealing nothing new. The pressure in my ears eased as the car idled. The ringing faded. I pulled out slowly, tires crunching over gravel at the edge of the lot. I kept my eyes forward, then checked the mirrors. The station lights glowed behind me, steady and unchanged. The fog swallowed them after a few seconds. I drove until the road straightened and the fog thinned. I did not stop again that night. When I finally pulled over at a rest area hours later, the sun was coming up. I slept in the front seat with the engine off and the windows cracked. In the morning, I went over it piece by piece. I replayed the details, looking for gaps. The shape had been tall and narrow because it was close and partially hidden by fog. My eyes had trouble focusing because the contrast was low and the light was bad. The ringing and pressure could have been caused by the change in elevation and weather. The metallic smell could have come from old equipment and wet ground. The pump stopping early could have been a mechanical fault. The sideways movement stayed with me. That part bothered me the most. Later, after looking at maps and satellite images, I saw that the tree line curved inward near the lot. A narrow service path ran behind it, used for maintenance. If someone or something moved along that path, parallel to the lot, the angle and fog could have made it appear to slide rather than walk. A person standing still in poor light, wearing dark clothing, could blur into the background until focus failed. A thin utility pole or damaged signpost partially obscured by mist could play tricks on depth. I told myself it was human. A worker, a transient, someone waiting for a ride, someone who noticed me and chose not to be seen. The lack of sound fit that idea better than anything else. What settled it for me was the station itself. When I checked later, I found a record of repeated maintenance calls for faulty pumps and lighting issues. Weather reports showed a pressure shift moving through the area that night. Nothing unusual. Nothing that pointed to anything beyond neglect and coincidence. I still think about how quickly the fog closed in after the shape disappeared, how complete it felt, like a door shutting. I think about how the pump stopped as if timed. I think about how alone that place was and how easily a person could stand there unseen. I did not attach anything extra to it. I did not turn it into something it was not. I was tired, unsettled, and alone on a road with no witnesses. The environment did the rest. After that night, I stopped trusting places that exist only because a light says they do. I learned to keep driving until I reached somewhere anchored by other people, other cars, other sounds. The road trip continued, but the fog never felt the same again. We stopped because my cousin missed the highway exit and did not want to turn around. It was late enough that the road felt empty, but not late enough to feel safe. The kind of time where you expect other cars, but keep seeing none. We had been driving for hours after leaving a family gathering that ran longer than planned. The air inside the car smelled like old coffee and fast food wrappers. My cousin was tired and irritated, and I was trying to stay awake by watching the road instead of my phone. The gas station appeared suddenly, bright in the distance, glowing harder than anything around it. The lights were too white, too clean, like they were trying to push the darkness away instead of just existing in it. Everything else around us was black. No houses, no other businesses, just a road, flat land, and that square of light ahead. The station sat slightly off the road, with a wide lot that looked larger than it needed to be. We pulled in mostly out of convenience. Fuel was not low, but neither of us wanted to keep driving blind roads after the missed exit. The pavement was uneven, patched in places, with oil stains that had soaked in over years. The pumps were older models, boxy, with peeling stickers and screens that looked dim even under the lights. A few bugs clicked against the overhead lamps, their shadows moving across the concrete. The building itself was small. One main door, windows covered in old ads and notices that had been taped up, so long the paper had faded to the same yellow-gray color. Inside, the air felt warmer but heavier, like the ventilation barely worked. The floor was clean but scuffed, the kind of clean that comes from constant mopping rather than care. What caught my attention right away was behind the counter. Someone had taped a line of Polaroid photos along the wall, just above where you would normally see price lists or lottery signs. There were at least a dozen of them, all the same gas pump. Pump 3, taken at different times of day and night, some in full sunlight, some at dusk, some under these same harsh lights. In every photo, someone stood near the pump, not posing, not centered, always partly cut off or caught at the edge of the frame. Blurry enough that you could not make out a face. Sometimes it looked like a man. Sometimes it looked smaller. In a few, it was hard to tell if it was even the same person. The background stayed the same. Same pump, same angle, same spot on the lot. Only the light changed. I stared at them longer than I should have. There was no clear pattern to the people, but the fact that they were always there, always near that same pump, made my chest feel tight. It felt unintentional, like the photos were not meant to show the people at all, but they kept ending up there anyway. The cashier noticed us looking. He did not say much, just moved slowly behind the counter, watching us in a way that felt measured. His eyes flicked toward the windows every few seconds. His posture was stiff, shoulders slightly raised, like someone bracing without knowing for what. We paid and stepped back outside. The lot felt quieter than before. The buzzing of the lights seemed louder, sharper. My cousin reached for the car keys and then hesitated, glancing toward the pumps. Pump 3 sat slightly farther from the building than the others, closer to the edge of the lot where the pavement met dirt. We did not use it. We fueled at a different pump, both of us moving faster than normal, not rushing but not lingering either. I kept glancing back at the building, half expecting to see someone watching from inside, but the windows reflected only light and our own shapes. As we finished and got back into the car, I noticed the smell of gas hanging heavier than it should have. Not fresh fuel from our pump, but a stronger, sour smell like something had been leaking for a while. We started the engine and rolled forward toward the exit. That was when I saw movement in the side mirror. Pump 3 had turned on. The handle hung loose, not seated properly, and gas poured out onto the concrete in a steady stream. It splashed and spread, darkening the ground, flowing toward the slight slope at the edge of the lot. No one stood near it. No car. No reason for it to be active. The pump display glowed faintly, numbers climbing without a pause. My cousin slowed without meaning to. For a moment, the car crept forward as we both watched. The smell hit harder through the vents, sharp enough to make my eyes water. The overhead light above that pump flickered once, then steadied. Nothing else moved. No alarms. No automatic shutoff. Just fuel spilling onto open ground. My cousin pressed the gas, and we pulled out onto the road. The station lights stayed bright behind us, unchanged. In the mirror, Pump 3 kept running until distance swallowed the details. We drove in silence for several miles. The road eventually merged back toward the highway, the familiar hum of tires on smoother pavement grounding us again. My heart slowed, but the image stayed fixed in my mind. That unattended pump, the steady flow, the way it had felt expected, almost routine. Later that night, after we reached home, I looked it up. The station had a record of pump malfunctions going back years. Pump 3 came up more than once. Faulty sensors, delayed shutoff, electrical issues tied to moisture and wiring that had never been fully replaced. There had been reports of spills, small fires that were put out quickly. No major incidents, but enough to leave a paper trail. I also found a local news article from years earlier. A minor accident at that same pump. A car pulling away too fast. A person standing too close. No names mentioned. Just a brief note about an investigation and a settlement. The Polaroids made sense then. Documentation. Evidence. Someone trying to track a problem without modern systems. The blurry figures were not intentional subjects. There were people who happened to be there when the camera was used. Customers. Workers. Anyone unlucky enough to be nearby when something went wrong. The cashier's behavior made sense too. The watching, the waiting, the way he seemed relieved when we avoided that pump. He had probably seen it happen more than once. Seen how quickly something small could turn dangerous. What stayed with me was not fear of anything unreal. It was the understanding of how close routine places are to quiet disasters. How a familiar stop can carry a history that does not announce itself. How many times people stand in the wrong place at the wrong moment and leave no mark except a blur in a photograph. We never went back there. The missed exit cost us time, but it kept us away from something that did not need anything extra to be dangerous. Just neglect, just old equipment, just the wrong pump on a dark road lit too brightly. waiting to fail again.